etc. Thank you very much, Iris. Clara, would you present the results of the roundtables about climate?
For sure. First, huge thanks to all the participants of the roundtable. I think it was very, very insightful to gather people from startups, from investment, from government. It was really, really cool to see all the exchanges we could have on the topic. The first thing I would highlight is, not to sound too catastrophic, but we all agreed that it's not a question whether we should try and aim to build sovereignty when it comes to climate, but we have to, because if we don't do it, basically we will have our industry disappear, and then we will have peace disappear, and then the world will go to an end. So that's kind of how the roundtable started, to give you a bit of insights on the discussion we had. So how do we do that? A lot of ideas were discussed. I think it came down to three things. First, regulation. Second, capital. And third, talent. So it's not going to sound too different from what you just said. Regulation in a way that there was also this idea that if we want to create big European scale-ups in this field, we can't stay in this mindset where people are just competing with one another from one country to the other. And we need regulation at European level to basically bring everyone forward on the same page and to help improve the standardization of all processes. So someone gave a very concrete example. Just the simple fact to calculate carbon emission varies from Germany to France. So if you're really trying to have an impact in this field, we need governments, and we need governments at the European Union level to really work closer together on defining what are those big standards we need to build together so we can have a chance to build European companies, and we don't put pressure on our companies to think through that every time they want to expand to one new market, they have to redo it all over again. Also regulation, because it was an interesting discussion between how sometimes Europe can have too much regulation, and it can slow companies down. Some people mentioned GDPR. I won't comment because I'm now working for the States. It's a bit of a weird position I'm in. But how we build those regulation, and in a way, it's great because this is also a reflection of how Europe wants to develop startups with values, but also sometimes can hinder the development and the speed of the development of startups. And we should rather use regulation to help speed things up. So we talked about some different fast-track initiatives that are existing in France. For example, when a company wants to open a factory, this was a big plan that was launched last year for industrial tech startups, hardware startups. How do we not only finance them, but help them open their factory, speed everything up when it comes to get the right authorization, so that it doesn't take 18 months to open a new plant, which is not really startup speed, but we can get things moving much faster. And I think there were other examples in Germany of this type of processes. So in a way, regulation we thought was a way to really accelerate the penetration of tech, and especially when it comes to climate, because we don't have time, we need regulators to help things move and take big bets. When it comes to capital, I think that was an interesting discussion on, again, better collaboration. How do we make sure, because there is a big funding gap, especially when it comes to hardware, and especially when it comes to fueling the startups that are not early stage anymore, but are not scale-ups yet. How do we make sure that we create the condition of success to fund those companies so that they're going to do the first prototypes, they're going to open the first factories, they're going to really go to this stage where they can have a chance to become a scale-up. And here, because there are some very different ways state do this, for example, in France there was one entrepreneur, not because I'm French, but one entrepreneur saying that the state helped a lot subsidizing this type of processes, but it's not necessarily the case in other European countries. So how do we better collaborate? So the fund of Scale Up Europe is a big one for scale-ups, but even before that, how do we better collaborate to create those conditions of success? Because we all agreed there are a lot of capital in Europe. We have, as I think it was one of the presentation earlier, we have the capacity to fund companies, but at the moment private capital doesn't take the risk and maybe comes back to regulation, to fuel those innovation, to take big bets that are going to take decades to really flourish. So the state also needs to come in with public funding and help incentivize private companies to also go into this field. And the last point on talent, it was interesting because we all agreed that we have the best talents in Europe when it comes to engineering, deep tech, obviously climate tech, which was a topic we discussed. Someone mentioned that we are the continent that spends the most on R&D when it comes to those topics. But we kind of suffer from the fact that you mentioned that at the moment there's still a struggle for tech transfer to happen from universities to private companies, to startups. So it's both cultural aspects, I guess. How do we make sure it's attractive for scientists to go and launch their companies and tackle those challenges? But also, probably coming back to regulation once again, how do we ensure that there is some kind of a common framework for universities when they are going to give their IP to entrepreneurs? What type of ownership should they give? What type of framework should we build? And how do we unify all of this at a European level? And the last point I would make on talent that I thought was also interesting is there's a need for scientists, engineers, in all those deep tech technologies to build companies, but there's also the need for all those scientists to go to the other side of the sector and go and join financing companies, because it's very hard, to the capital point, for private companies today to take those bets, because sometimes they just don't really understand the tech behind it. So how do we build also those bridges between science and investment, so that we can get more talents join investment funds? They can be private or public, both need them, and really help take those bets, being a little bit more reassured that they are the right bets.
Thank you. As you see, they have been very, very productive. Thank you.